Over the last 3 or 4 years, I've come to the floor to discuss with my colleagues information that I get from whistleblowers in the FBI, the Department of Justice, most of it dealing with the subject of the political weaponization of people at the highest levels of the FBI and their violating protocol, getting involved in political situations that the FBI has no business being in. So last week when Mr. Patel was before my Judiciary Committee, I released some new emails that I have gotten that show further involvement of certain people in the case against Trump that Jack Smith headed up. So I'm here today because when I released those emails last week, there was a New York Times story that got it all wrong. So today, I want to bring to my colleagues' attention a January 30th, 2025 New York Times article from Adam Goldman and Alan Fuhrer about my and Senator Johnson's oversight of the FBI. In that article, they said, quote, FBI emails released Thursday showed that agents and officials followed standard procedure when, end of quote, when opening the Trump elector case. Well, they read it wrong, and I'm going to tell you why they read it wrong. The article written by these two can be summed up like this: a very wet kiss to the politically biased leadership within the FBI. Last week, Senator Johnson and I made public FBI records that showed a snapshot into the origins of the Jack Smith electoral case against Trump. Those records included a February 14th, 2022 email from Assistant Special Agent in Charge Thibault to his subordinate agent Michelle Ball. The subject line of that email was, quote unquote, elector matter, end of quote. My office has been told that Thibault handpicked subordinate agents, including Michelle Ball and Jamie Garman, who were both referenced in the documents that I released, to conceal his role as an initiating agent. The documents Senator Johnson and I released support that. Now, in the February 2022 email, Special Agent Thibault says, in part, quote, here is the draft opening language we discussed, end quote. Attached to that email is a Word document titled, quote, unquote, one word elector. That Word document, when opened, contains information that became part of the predicating document that was later be approved to open a case codenamed Arctic Frost. That was all about prosecuting then citizen Trump. When opening the Word document, it says this, quote, author Timothy Thibault, end quote. It also says this, quote, last modified by Timothy Thibault, end quote. Today, Senator Johnson and I will be publicly releasing a new email that we've obtained that was sent from Tebow to Michelle Ball and Jamie Garman, March the 1st, 2022. In the email, Tebow says, quote, "To add, we'll come by to discuss," end quote. The document was attached to the email with language to be added to the Arctic Frost document opening the investigation against Trump. The document attached to the email lists the author and modifier as, you guessed it, Tebow. Well, the document itself is titled Arctic Frost, and it adds President Trump as a criminal subject to the investigation. Notably, the document lists then Chairman Durbin's 2021 investigative report on Trump to help justify that Trump yet fails to use my 2021 report, which provided much needed context. Now, the New York Times article said the FBI records Senator Johnson and I made public, quote, showed that agents and officials followed standard procedure, end quote, but that totally ignores the facts, and evidence, let alone not even considering the FBI rules for making these determinations for opening a prosecution case. So I go to these rules. Section 7:7.1, I'm not sure I understand the periods in this section, but anyway, 7.7.1, in the FBI's Domestic Investigations Operation Guide, and that's essentially the FBI's manual, is titled, quote, opening documentation, end of quote. That rule shows the workflow approval and make clear that supervisors, I want to emphasize, supervisors are to approve the work product provided to them. And the point here is Tebow was not that sort of a supervisor. In other words, the intent of this rule, based on its plain text, is that subordinate agents provide work product to supervising agents for the latter's approval. Now, should there be any doubt about this intent, look no further than section 3.5.2.3, titled, quote, no self-approval rule, end of quote. That rule says in part, quote, an approval, official, and that rule uses the word supervisor to define that person, may not self-approve his or her own work or activity. An independent evaluation and approval of these activities must be obtained, including the opening and the closing of any assessment or predicated investigation, end of quote. Then the rule says this, quote, in the event that an FBI employee errantly conducts a self-approval, the approval is considered substantial noncompliance and must be documented. So that leaves you with Tebow self-approving something that he wasn't supposed to self-approve. And moreover, another FBI document defines, quote, general rules and procedures, end of quote, of supervisors as this, quote, supervisor assigns leads, approves documents, assigned squad current workload, end of quote. None of this says that a supervisor like Thibault is allowed to draft and open a case and approve it for themselves. Based on the facts and the evidence that Senator Johnson and I have obtained to date, and based upon the FBI's own rules, Thibault essentially self-approved his own case in violation of FBI rules, which means this guy was out to get Trump as fast as he could. According to this case that, again, I say is named Arctic Frost, as they codenamed the Trump case, was defective from the very start, not only from a political infection standpoint, but also because of substantial non-compliance with FBI rules. So getting back to the New York Times article, at this point, the paper simply is an FBI stenographer and propagandist parroting FBI lies, claiming emails released by me and Senator Johnson, quote, showed that agents and officials followed standard procedure, end of quote, when opening Arctic Frost. As with most of the information in the leaks the FBI has laundered through Goldman, the truth is quite the opposite of the FBI and the New York Times narrative. Does the New York Times believe that it's normal for an assistant special agent in charge to prepare case predication for opening an investigation and then feed it to street agents, and add to that doing it to a former president of the United States? Is it normal for the FBI agents to ignore sources that counteracts the predication they so badly manufactured? Is it normal for an assistant special agent in charge to post anti-Trump social media posts under his true name and title while he's overseeing the most politically sensitive investigation for the FBI? Is it normal for an assistant special in charge responsible for the most sensitive political investigations in the FBI to be forced to resign for partisanship on the job and then be found to have violated the Hatch Act for that same partisanship? It seems to this senator that the New York Times has become the paid publicist of senior members of the FBI, an unethical quid pro quo of pushing their narratives in exchange for publishing false information. On the occasion of the latest article, as a mouthpiece for nameless FBI sources, I invite the New York Times editorial board to undertake its own investigation into Goldman's receipt of one-sided law enforcement information leaked to him from FBI employees. Absent that, continued New York Times reporting in this area is inherently questionable. Now, I started this by talking about occasionally from time to time I come to the United States Senate floor to discuss information I get from whistleblowers and that deals with the political weaponization of the FBI. I released some of those emails last week at the Patel hearing. Now, what Patel is all about, by President Trump appointing him to the FBI director, is simply to see that none of this stuff that I've discussed with you and in previous speeches on the floor of the United States Senate ever happens again. and that the FBI is going to be a law enforcement agency and not a political weaponization organization. And I say that about the people that are on the 7th floor of the FBI, Hoover FBI building. I'm not condemning the people that are working FBI cases in Iowa or any of the other 49 states, because they're doing their job. But they should have the full support of the 7th floor of the building and not being concerned about prosecuting a former president of the United States, now a president reelected as the 47th president of the United States.